It is 1845 in Ireland's capital. Dublin is a city caught between grandeur and hardship. Georgian townhouses line the wide boulevards, their proud facades masking the struggle within. Horse-drawn carts rattle over the cobblestones, iron wheels clattering in the damp air. From the docks, the salty tang of the Liffey drifts inland, mingling with the acrid smoke of coal fires that cling to every narrow street. Vendors cry out in thick accents, hawking bread, fish, and newspapers to hurried passers-by. The smell of roasting chestnuts competes with the stench of open drains and horse manure. Children dart between the traffic of carriages and carts, barefooted and quick, their laughter carrying over the steady beat of hooves. But the atmosphere is heavy too. Clouds roll in low from the Irish Sea, bringing drizzles that turn the cobbles slick and shining. The great famine is beginning its slow chokehold on the countryside, and whispers of hunger and disease seep into the city with every migrant who arrives at the quayside. Dublin is alive but uneasy, and in a modest household, tucked behind one of the city's respectable streets, a frail boy named Thomas John Barnardo is growing up. His father, a wine merchant, keeps the family comfortable, but young Thomas is often sickly, confined indoors, his pale complexion a contrast to the bustling, noisy city just beyond the window. Dublin streets had been Thomas Barnardo's classroom. From the carriage wheels splashing through puddles to the cries of ragged children begging at doorsteps, he absorbed every sight and sound with a quiet intensity. His sickly frame meant he often lingered at the edges, observing rather than joining in. Yet those same frailties gave him a determination. If he could not be strong in body, then perhaps he could be useful in spirit. At home, his father's trade in wine brought the family security, but Thomas's imagination looked elsewhere. Reports of cholera outbreaks in the city stirred something in him. The damp air carried more than just the smell of coal smoke and salt. It carried whispers of illness, of lives cut short too soon. Medicine seemed a noble calling, a way to turn weakness into purpose. London to him was both promise and peril. From the docks of Dublin, he would watch ships bound for the great city across the water, their masts creaking against the tide. He dreamed of the metropolis, a place where streets were said to be lined with opportunity, where knowledge could be gained in crowded lecture halls rather than in books read by candlelight. When he finally set foot in London in the mid-1860s, he was not yet the man remembered for charity, but a young student with ambition. The city assaulted his senses, the thick smog clinging to the Thames, the endless press of carriages along Holborn, the desperate poor huddled beneath bridges. London was vast, intimidating, but filled with possibility. Barnardo came to study medicine, inspired by the hope of becoming a missionary doctor. He imagined himself sailing east, to China or India, bringing both healing and the word of God. But the reality he found in London's East End would change all of that. In the soot-blackened alleyways, among barefoot children sleeping on cellar steps, he discovered a mission closer than he had ever imagined. It is a bitter evening in London's East End. The fog clings low to the ground, wrapping the narrow alleys in a damp grey shroud. Gas lamps sputter weakly against the darkness, their light swallowed by smoke drifting from 1,000 chimneys. The air is heavy with the reek of coal dust, rotting refuse, and the sour tang of unwashed bodies packed into overcrowded lodging houses. Thomas Barnardo, still a medical student, threads his way through the warren of streets. His breath clouds in the cold air as he moves past costermongers closing up their carts, the last of their bruised apples and withered cabbages swept into the gutter. The cobbles glisten with rain, and rats skitter between puddles, bold as cats. From a doorway, a thin voice calls out. Barnardo turns. In the shadows crouches a boy, no more than 10 years old. His clothes are little more than rags, the fabric stiff with dirt. Bare feet press against the wet stone, toes raw and red with cold. His face, sharp with hunger, is lit for an instant by the glow of a passing lamp. The boy's eyes are what stopped Barnardo, wide, pleading, but also resigned, as if he has asked this question too many times and expects the same silence in reply. Barnardo kneels, the damp soaking through his coat. He listens as the boy tells him of nights spent under railway arches, of food scavenged from rubbish heaps, of friends lost to fever. Each word strikes Barnardo harder than any textbook or lecture ever could. This isn't a case study. This is London's reality, alive and shivering in front of him. He offers the boy a hand, and together they walk away from the alley. In that moment, Barnardo's path shifts forever. The dream of a missionary voyage to distant lands fades. His mission is here, in these streets, among these children. The principle takes root. No destitute child ever refused admission. It will become the foundation of everything he builds, and it all begins with a single boy in the fog who asked for help and was answered. The East End of London in the 1860s was a place of extremes. On one side, the wealth of the city, banks, merchants, and gentlemen's clubs. On the other, the teeming slums of Stepney, Whitechapel and Limehouse, where families crowded 10 to a room, and children fought dogs for scraps of food. It was here, in Stepney Causeway, that Barnardo opened his first shelter in 1870. It was not a grand affair, a converted stable, cold and bare, with rough wooden floors and little furniture. But to the boys who entered, thin, hollow-eyed, their ribs showing through torn shirts, it was a refuge. Funding this dream was another matter. Barnardo had no great inheritance, no wealthy patrons waiting in the wings. Instead, he relied on relentless energy and persuasion. He spoke in churches, in halls, in drawing rooms, anywhere he could gather an audience. With fiery words and vivid stories, he painted pictures of the children he had seen sleeping in gutters, their lives wasted before they had begun. His passion was contagious. Slowly, the pennies and pounds trickled in, from businessmen, clergymen, and ordinary Londoners moved by his cause. He also had luck on his side. One evening, preaching at a meeting, Barnardo's words reached Lord Shaftesbury, already famous as a champion of the poor. With his support, doors opened, donations grew, and so did the vision. Life in those early homes was simple, but for many children, it was the first taste of safety they had ever known. Meals were plain, bread, broth, porridge, but regular. Beds were hard but warm and dry. Mornings began with prayers, followed by lessons in reading, writing, and arithmetic. In the workshops, boys learned trades, carpentry, shoemaking, tailoring. Barnardo was determined that they leave not just fed and clothed, but equipped to earn their way. Still, the homes were crowded. The demand never ceased. Queues of ragged children formed outside the doors each night. Some turned away when there was simply no more room. Barnardo would later vow that no destitute child would ever again be refused admission. But in those first years, the reality was harsh. The orphans were grateful, yet the scale of suffering weighed on him daily. For every cheer that greeted Barnardo's work, there were also whispers and sometimes shouts of doubt. The homes grew rapidly, from a single refuge in Stepney Causeway to dozens scattered across London and beyond. By the 1880s, thousands of children passed through his doors each year. To his supporters, it was proof of God's blessing. To his critics, it was suspicious. Journalists accused him of exaggerating numbers. Could one man really have rescued so many? Others said his fundraising appeals relied too heavily on melodrama, painting the children's suffering in colours too vivid to be true. Barnardo himself admitted to using photographs, carefully staged to show children before and after their rescue to shock potential donors. For some, this was clever marketing. For others, it was manipulation. Then came the controversy of child migration. Barnardo, like many Victorians, believed opportunity lay in the empire. Thousands of children were shipped to Canada and Australia to begin new lives on farms or as domestic servants. Some thrived, others endured hardship, loneliness, even abuse. At the time, Barnardo saw it as a lifeline, a way out of London's misery. Today, it is remembered as one of the darker chapters in the story. Court cases followed. Families accused him of overstepping, of keeping children away from their relatives. Newspapers ran headlines questioning his judgment. He fought back with the same fervour he had always shown, defending his mission as righteous, if imperfect. The need is too great, he declared, to wait for flawless methods. Through it all, his resolve never faltered. Even his fiercest critics admitted one thing. No man of his generation did more to draw attention to the plight of Britain's destitute children. And for every accusation, there were countless orphans who spoke of warmth, safety, and a chance at life they would otherwise have been denied. Barnardo was not a saint. He was stubborn, at times reckless, and often controversial, but he was unshakably driven. And in the swirl of praise and scandal, his work only grew. By the turn of the 20th century, Thomas Barnardo was no longer the restless young student stalking London's alleys. His hair had turned silver, his frame softened with age, but his body was failing. Years of relentless work, ceaseless travel, and endless appeals had taken their toll. In the summer of 1905, Barnardo fell gravely ill. At his home in Surbiton, on the outskirts of London, he lay confined to his bed, the sound of carriage wheels on the road outside, a faint reminder of the world continuing beyond his window. The air smelled of linseed and medicine, the curtains drawn against the sun. Around him, the walls were lined with letters, photographs and tokens from children he had once rescued, now adults, many thriving, writing to thank the man who had given them a chance. His breathing grew shallow, laboured. Family and colleagues gathered at his bedside, listening to the slow rhythm of a life nearing its close. On September 19th, 1905, Thomas John Barnardo died, aged just 60. Word spread quickly across London and then the nation. Newspapers hailed him as the children's friend. For many of the poor who had passed through his homes, it felt like the loss of a father. At the time of his death, Barnardo's organisation had grown far beyond a single refuge. Nearly 100 homes and schools sheltered more than 8,000 children on any given night. In total, over 60,000 had passed through his care. His vision had become an institution, and it did not end with him. Barnardo's was taken up by those who had worked alongside him, adapting to each new age. The model of sprawling orphanages eventually gave way to fostering and adoption, but the principle remained the same. No child left without care, no child left without hope. Today, Barnardo's is one of the UK's largest children's charities. It no longer runs orphanages, but instead supports vulnerable children in countless ways: foster care, adoption, mental health services, and campaigns against abuse and exploitation. The echo of Barnardo's promise, made to a shivering boy in a foggy London street, still rings true. From the damp alleys of Dublin to the crowded slums of Whitechapel, from the converted stable at Stepney Causeway to a modern network of support stretching across Britain, the journey of one frail boy who chose to care has carried forward for more than a century. Thomas Barnardo's story is not only a chapter in the past, it is a legacy still living, still shaping lives today.